Imagine this. It's the year 1460. A cold wind crawls through the forests of Wallachia. On the hill above you stands a man, his armor splattered with blood, his eyes hollow and burning. Around him, the ground is covered with wooden stakes. Hundreds of bodies hang from them, twitching in the dying light. That man has a name: Vlad the Impaler. History remembers him as a prince, but centuries later, he would become something else. A monster of legend. A creature that drinks blood and never dies. What if I told you Dracula was real? Welcome to Once Before, the channel where we dive into history through the stories of real people who lived it. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you won't miss the next story. Long before Vlad the Impaler, before castles and crimson capes, the fear of the undead already haunted humanity. Every culture had its own name for the creature that fed on life, and none of them sparkled in the sunlight. In ancient Babylon, people whispered of spirits that rose from graves to drain the strength of the living. In old Hebrew tales, there was Lilith, the first wife of Adam, a night demon who preyed on newborns. The Greeks spoke of Lamia, a beautiful woman cursed to devour children and drink the blood of men. But it was in the misty villages of Eastern Europe where these stories grew teeth. In places where the nights were long, the winters were cruel, and death was always nearby. Peasants believed that sometimes the dead didn't stay dead. If a person lived a sinful life or died suddenly without proper burial, they might return, not as a ghost, but as something worse. A bloated, ruddy corpse crawling out of its grave to feast on family and neighbors. In 1727, in a Serbian village, a soldier named Arnold Paole was buried after a tragic accident. Weeks later, villagers began to die mysteriously. They said they'd seen Paole walking at night. When officials finally dug up his grave, they found his body intact, his face flushed with color, and blood on his lips. When they drove a stake through his heart, the corpse let out a scream that echoed across Europe. To people who didn't understand disease, decomposition, or infection, these stories made sense. They turned fear into folklore. They gave shape to the unseen horrors that stalked their world: plagues, decay, and the slow, inexplicable death of those they loved. The vampire, in those days, wasn't noble or romantic. It was a monster born of rot and panic. A walking corpse that reminded everyone how fragile life really was. But that was only the beginning. Because soon, this shapeless terror would evolve into something far more human and far more dangerous. To understand why people truly believed in vampires, you have to step into their world. When a body was exhumed after days in the ground, it sometimes looked alive. Skin tightened, blood pooled near the mouth, and gases in the corpse made it groan when touched. To villagers, that wasn't biology, that was proof. In the 18th century, reports of vampires spread like wildfire through Eastern Europe. Newspapers printed detailed accounts, officials investigated graves, and priests performed exorcisms. The church saw something useful in all this. Vampire panic made people cling tighter to religion. Priests declared that only faith and the rituals of the church could protect your soul from rising after death.
You have to have faith!
The fear of vampires became another way to keep control over terrified peasants. And so, what began as superstition turned into theology. It wasn't really about monsters in the night. It was about death, guilt, and the fear of being forgotten. The vampire wasn't just a corpse that wouldn't die. It was a mirror of the people who feared it. Wallachia, mid-1400s. The Ottoman Empire looms over Eastern Europe like a storm, and in the small, war-torn land between empires, a prince rises. Vlad III Dracula. He was no creature of the night. He was flesh, blood, and vengeance. As a boy, Vlad and his brother were taken hostage by the Ottomans. He learned cruelty in their dungeons, and when he was freed, he used it like a weapon. When he became prince, his rule was soaked in terror. He impaled his enemies on wooden stakes, soldiers, nobles, merchants, even women and children, and left their corpses lining the roads like a forest of death. In 1462, when the Sultan invaded, Vlad struck back with psychological warfare. He left 20,000 impaled bodies outside the capital. The Sultan's army turned away in horror. To his people, Vlad was both hero and nightmare. He defended Wallachia from foreign rule, but his thirst for control knew no limit. He punished the lazy, the poor, the sick, anyone who weakened his vision of a pure and obedient state. Foreign visitors carried his legend westward, stories of a prince who drank blood, who dined among corpses, who laughed as he watched them die. These tales spread across Europe, mutating with every retelling. By the time they reached the cities of the Enlightenment, Vlad the Impaler was no longer just a ruler. He was the devil in human skin. Centuries later, the world had changed. Electric lights flickered in London. Science explained disease. Empires ruled the globe, but the hunger for monsters never died. In 1897, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker sat down to write a Gothic novel. He called it Dracula. Stoker never visited Transylvania, but he read of Vlad the Impaler, a name that lingered in dusty archives. He borrowed the name Dracula, meaning son of the dragon, and gave it new life. His count was elegant, ancient, and terrifying. He didn't just drink blood. He invaded the body, the mind, the morality of an entire age. In Victorian society, obsessed with purity and repression, Dracula became more than a horror story. He embodied forbidden desire, sexuality, disease, and the fear of the foreign. The vampire's bite was a metaphor. The loss of control, the seduction of sin. When readers met Count Dracula, they weren't just afraid of a monster. They were afraid of themselves. From the dark soil of Wallachia to the candlelit parlors of London, the myth had evolved. The vampire was no longer a decaying corpse in a village graveyard. It was eternal, beautiful, and it would never stop hungering. When cinema was born, the vampire followed. In Nosferatu, he was a plague, pale, sickly, haunting. By the time Bela Lugosi wore the cape, he had changed, elegant, hypnotic, dangerous in silence. The monster had learned to smile. Decades later, Anne Rice gave him a soul. In Interview with the Vampire, the undead finally spoke, not of power, but of pain. Louis and Lestat weren't hunting, they were searching for love, for meaning, for a reason to keep living forever. Coppola's Dracula sealed it. Blood became desire. Immortality became tragedy. Then came television. The vampire left the castle and moved next door. Buffy gave him guilt. Angel gave him purpose. True Blood gave him politics. He was no longer a creature to fear, but a reflection of loneliness, identity, hunger. The bite turned from horror to metaphor, from Orlok's shadow to Edward's shimmer. The vampire has survived every century. He changes, but never dies. Because in the end, he isn't just a monster. He's our mirror, staring back from the dark, asking what we'd trade for a taste of forever. By the 21st century, the vampire had done what few monsters ever could. It survived us. From Twilight's glittering immortals to the Vampire Diaries' tragic lovers, the creature that once haunted graveyards now walked high school hallways. The monster became a fantasy, a symbol of eternal youth, forbidden romance, and beauty that never fades. Pop culture turned fear into fascination. Vampires weren't something to destroy anymore. They were something to be. Fashion followed. Pale skin, red lips, black velvet. The Gothic aesthetic left the crypt and stepped onto the runway. Meanwhile, tourists flooded Transylvania, chasing the myth of Dracula like a pilgrimage. Castles that once terrified villagers became photo ops for dreamers chasing immortality. The vampire, once a curse, was now a brand, an immortal icon, polished, romantic, marketable. But beneath the glitter, the old hunger still whispered. The same ancient eyes still watched from the dark. Because even when we dress him in silk and make him beautiful, the vampire is still what he's always been. A story about what we fear and what we secretly desire. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, give the video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to Once Before for more journeys into the darker corners of history. Until next time, remember, the past isn't gone. It's waiting to be told once before.